over a fairly long career in theatre and that, you know, I've gained a pretty wide knowledge of what it is that makes that art work. I don't have that same depth or breadth of knowledge when it comes to painting. So I could paint happily and naively, and there was something beautifully liberating about that, I have to say. I loved being a student again, being a student of painting, you know. It was a lovely feeling. I was messing around with Indian ink, which did not work, so it's going to the recyclers. When I was a kid, you know, I wasn't one of those kids who was given paints to play with and all. I have no recollection of any of that. And then when I was at school, I remember being 14 years of age, kicked out of the art class, told that the only thing I'd ever draw would be the dole if I was lucky, you know. And when you're told that kind of stuff when you're a kid, you believe it. And I believed, oh, I don't have any talent whatsoever for that kind of thing. This is a big part of this process. In my late 50s, it must have been, I was in Portugal. I had a crisis back home, something to do with the family, and I was going crazy, couldn't sleep, couldn't whatever. And one afternoon, I was sitting on a table outside, and there was a little paint palette that the kids had been using, and a brush, and I just started doodling with this paintbrush, and half an hour later, I realized it was the first respite I'd had from this terrible thing that was kind of, you know, haunting me from back home. And it just sparked an interest, and so from then on, I started, especially if I was tired or, you know, couldn't get a break or something, and I had to keep awake, but didn't have to be doing stuff. I'd start doodling and messing around with little drawings, and so that's how the whole thing started. I'm doing a fairly traditional landscape and sky. I'm suggesting that, but it may well, you know, it may well be that this whole thing becomes reverse. It may be that this, now that we've gone into these blue tones, it may well be this turns into water. You know, it might turn into ice. You go through all kinds of stages and may well, of course, lose in the process all kinds of better pieces because you're not capturing something that's there for the taking. You don't see it quick enough. But I've got on that trip to Portugal a bit later, I realized, it was my wife Annie's birthday and I hadn't got her a card. So I just got a little piece of cardboard and got that little brush out again and those paints and just did a little card for her. And that was the start of a whole new journey. And if you'd said to me, you know, before that you'd relish trying to work as a visual artist, I would have laughed at you. Sitting being silly with the token bird. So this section here is represents really a place that's very dear to me, a place down in Portugal called Alvor. And I do a lot of walking down there, and I walk down to these salt marshes where there's a great deal of wildlife and where clams can be picked. And these I discovered years ago when I first started trying to sketch that I could go down there and watch people who would get into kind of, you know, down on the ground in the mud, scraping up to try and get clams to take home for lunch that day or to sell in the restaurant. And they'll hold that position for kind of 20 minutes or something as they're scrabbling down in the mud and the sand and that. And so I was getting free models, so I could try to develop my drawing skills a bit. And then from that, it led to me trying to make paintings of some of them. I go to a class at Hope University, which I was very fortunate enough to be invited to about 10 years ago, run by Peter Moore. And Peter calls his class Teaching the Eye to See, based on the Ruskin statement that if you're going to paint, if you're going to draw, then the first thing you need to do is actually to look, to see, to make sure that you see, and that you use your eyes, which I was terribly guilty of never really doing, because I began my artistic life by hearing, by hearing how people speak and what they're saying, and that became dialogue in there. And if you're going to paint, you do have to look, and you have to see in a different way. And I've since started to use my eyes and my vision much more acutely than I ever did before that, in order to try to see better. David Hockney, when he was at Bradford School of Art before he went to the Royal College, he was in a life class trying to draw a model, and his teacher came up to him and took his pencil off him and quickly sketched this model. And as Hockney said, he said, I could see immediately that the teacher could see better than I could. And from that moment on, I knew that I had to look and see better. Now, you'll see when this lays down, it immediately starts to do things to that paint. Now, because the paint is still wet, it's still fluid, I can still move that paint around. You can still manipulate that underneath, but I don't want it to get muddy. You see that there? I really like that. Don't know what it is. Some of the pictures in the exhibition here were finished in one sitting, and when that happens, it's terrific. Other pictures have been worked and reworked over 3, 4, 5 years. The figures in this, obviously, are painted in a traditional way, but then I don't know how apparent it is because it's not finished yet, but these are figures in a fountain on the South Bank in London. This has stayed around now for about 12 months, whilst I tried to work out how best to get the effect of this water streaming down in front of them. And of course, you can't paint that stuff, because you try to paint that with a paintbrush, and the randomness of water, even though because it's coming up from jets, there's a uniformity about the lines, you still have to get the randomness of the water's reflection and refraction. And that comes about by a process of dry brushing and then putting paint on. In fact, I put it on one of those, those metal, knocking about. Oh yeah. Carpet rod. So that, I put paint on there and just, I mean, not knowing if it would work or it wouldn't work. So, there are, at any time, there are a number of paintings employing different techniques will be going on in the studio. I'm just going to try this, which is to just sneak a run of paint ink underneath and see where it goes. And I'm just trying to bring a bit of life down here, see what happens, or some possibility. When I came to try to paint in my mid-50s, if I was trying to paint an airplane, I wanted the wings, and I wanted everything, and I wanted you to see through a window where there was this guy having his lunch and all that kind of stuff, because that's the stage that I was at. You don't want to be stuck there. You don't want to be stuck just being illustrative, if you like. You want to be able to paint feeling. Ultimately, it's what it's about. And probably one of the reasons that I paint a lot of landscape is that landscape moves me. It always has done. These two pictures both emerged from sketches that I made when I was staying down in the Golden Valley in Herefordshire, which is where my sister lives. The view is out down the valley, looking towards the Malvern Hills, which I've not included in here. There's just a hint. I had been sitting at the bottom of the meadow, sitting on a very low stool, so I had a very low view of things, a very, very low eye line. And the idea that the spectacular end of the valley, Malvern Hills, in the distance, for once, weren't going to be the main focus of the picture, but in fact what was right in front of me, this low eye perspective, was going to be the picture itself. That's one of the things that kind of most intrigued me, but with, as I say, just the hint of this distant landscape. This was about the time when I'd started to explore other ways of putting paint onto canvas or paper or board than with a brush, where I'll use anything to hand in the studio. Credit cards, bits of cardboard that are lying around, and these lines are achieved by using bits of old rulers, wood that's knocking about in the studio, plasterers, trowels, whacked, anything in order to experiment and see if you can create that kind of vibrant kind of wildflower fauna kind of effect that you get, that for me would become far too ordered and polite if I was somehow only using a brush.
Beware a big ship sailing up this river. There's something in the eye stings my eyes and makes them weep tonight. If I could raise the fire.
You could spend forever trying to get this almost stained glass effect, you know, which is, and it's lovely the way it happens.
Where two shy lovers once chanced to
Although it's got a lot of abstract quality in it, it's very much, for me, a representational picture of a place, and a place that I know. Now, it doesn't have to be painted in such a way that if I said to you, that is the woods down the way, that you'll go, oh yeah, you've got that woods right. I've moved on from that, I think. And when I first started painting, I would have been deeply upset if I'd said, that's the woods down the way, and you'd said to me, it doesn't look like the woods down the way.
something in the eye. Something.
Before I was painting myself, I remember going to see a Van Gogh exhibition and just standing looking at one particular picture because the gallery was so packed, and seeing how monumentally thick the paint was on the canvas. And I think that was probably still at the back of my mind when I began to explore this kind of technique using acrylic paints, not oil paints, where you have a surface applied on the canvas before you start painting. And in the case of all three, certainly in this raised water area here and on throughout these, mixing common PVA with, in this case, card, a kitchen roll, bits of newspaper, anything that was to hand in the studio. In each case, laid down randomly, because I found very early on that if I tried to plan what the image would be, the painting it just never ever worked. With this type of work, I found one had to trust the painting itself to reveal itself. Sometimes the best thing for you, the painter, to do is get out the way and leave it to the paint and leave it to the paper and the PVA, and it will find its own route. And it can be a process that takes place over quite some time, because I've got others of these still on the go in the studio that haven't revealed themselves yet. But I now have the patience to understand that they, in time, probably will reveal what kind of paintings they are. And I feel all the more disposed to those paintings because they found their own way with less input from me. It's taken a bit of time, but this is finally finished. One of the pictures that's achieved by using techniques other than using a brush alone. I did the figures originally, and then the painting must have hung around in the studio for about 18 months while I worked out how I was gonna apply this falling water. And I think the final thing I did was just with the end of a brush create this slight splash of water down at the bottom going into this sump drain away thing. I just love it. It's a new challenge. It's, you know, completely new disciplines. But of course, at the same time, it has all the same problems that any artwork does. You know, whether you're working in poetry, film, the theatre, you have to confront the same demons. How do I fill that empty space on the stage? How do I fill that empty page? How do I fill that blank canvas? You know, what techniques do I need to develop to do that and to realise the ambition you have for it? There's something happening there that's, to me, much better than anything I would have come up with had I carried on trying to control it too much. I want to paint in every style. I want to paint everything. There's a great Adrian Henry poem called I Want to Paint. And I often feel exactly like that. I want to paint everything there is that's possible to paint. And I want to paint it in every possible way that there is. And of course there's every way that you can, every which way you can do it. It's a journey I'm glad I set out on, and I'm glad that I'm still pursuing it. To be 69 years of age and to be a student of art is a fantastically fortunate place to be.